The red sand of Kelth Prime stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the massive excavation site that had become 12-year-old Jake Thompson's temporary home. His mom, Dr. Emily Thompson, had been working here for 3 years straight, digging up what the alien Kelthians called the Dragon Shrine of Varmoth. Jake had only arrived 2 weeks ago for summer break, and he was already bored out of his mind. The Kelthians were a reptilian species that moved like they had all the time in the world, which they did since they lived for about 300 years. They treated every brush stroke on ancient stone like it was brain surgery. Jake's mom loved working with them, but to Jake, watching paint dry seemed more exciting than watching a Kelthian archaeologist spend 4 hours examining a single tile. The shrine itself was incredible though. It rose from the red desert like a frozen wave of crystal and black stone, carved with images of dragon-like creatures that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. The local Kelthians wouldn't go near it after dark. They said the shrine was cursed, that the Varmothians who built it had angered the gods and been wiped out for their pride. The expedition team just called it superstition. Jake spent most days wandering the outer chambers while his mom worked on translating wall inscriptions. The Kelthian researchers had strict rules. Nobody touched anything in the inner sanctum, nobody went past the safety barriers, and definitely nobody messed with the giant dragon statue that coiled around the central pillar like it was guarding something. But on his 15th day there, something changed. Jake was eating lunch near the main chamber when he heard it, a whisper that didn't come through his ears but seemed to form directly in his thoughts. It wasn't words exactly, more like a feeling of being called, like when you know someone's staring at you from across a room. He followed the feeling deeper into the shrine than he'd ever gone before. The Kelthian guards were on a shift change and his mom was busy in the north wing. The dragon statue towered above him, easily 50 feet tall, carved from stone that looked almost alive in the dim light filtering through crystalline walls. That's when Jake noticed something nobody else had seen. The double suns of Kelth Prime were setting at a specific angle, and their light hit the dragon's claw in a way that revealed a shadow. No, not a shadow, an opening. A small chamber hidden beneath where the claw touched the ground, invisible from any other angle or time of day. Jake's heart pounded as he squeezed into the space. Inside, the walls were covered in glowing symbols. Not the formal geometric Varmothian writing his mom had been studying, but something wilder, more organic. The symbols seemed to pulse with their own light, and as Jake stared at them, he realized something impossible. He could read them. Not translate them, he didn't know the language. But somehow, the meaning flowed directly into his mind like water finding its level. The symbols told a story of imprisonment and hope, of a word hidden away for someone brave enough or foolish enough to speak it. A word that only humans could pronounce, buried in their ancient languages from before Earth joined the galactic community. The word formed in Jake's mouth like it had been waiting there his whole life. It tasted like smoke and starlight, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. He didn't mean to say it out loud. The word just came. Ventharak. The shrine shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, Jake heard Kelthian researchers shouting in alarm. But he couldn't move, couldn't look away from the dragon statue. Because the dragon's eyes, solid stone a moment before, were now burning with golden fire. And something ancient, something that had been sleeping for 800 years, was waking up. Jake felt it reach into his mind like a hand grasping for a lifeline. Memories that weren't his flooded through his consciousness. Cities of light, beings that flew between stars without ships, and then judgment, imprisonment, an entire civilization frozen in time as punishment for daring to dream too big. The last thing Jake heard before his knees hit the stone floor was a voice, old as mountains and sharp as broken glass, speaking directly into his soul. Finally, the keybearer has come. Now, young human, let us see if your species has the courage to finish what you've started. Jake's vision went white as the voice crashed through his mind like a tidal wave. He could feel his mom's hands on his shoulders, shaking him, shouting his name, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. The dragon statue wasn't moving, not physically, but something inside it was unfurling, stretching consciousness that had been compressed into stone for centuries. The Kelthian researchers were running. Their calm, methodical nature had completely shattered the moment the shrine started glowing. Alarms blared across the excavation site. Through the chaos, Jake heard the expedition leader screaming into a communicator about unauthorized activation of Xenotech and immediate evacuation protocols. But Emily Thompson wasn't running. She wrapped her arms around her son and tried to drag him away from the dragon statue, but Jake's legs wouldn't work. His whole body felt like it was being rewritten from the inside out. "Mom, I can see it," Jake gasped. "I can see everything." And he could. The being inside the statue called itself Coranthax, and it was flooding Jake's mind with images faster than he could process them. He saw the Varmothian civilization at its peak, beings that looked like a cross between humans and dragons, with crystalline scales that reflected starlight. They'd built cities that floated between dimensions, developed technology that made current galactic science look like cave paintings. Then came the judgment. Massive entities appeared in Varmothian space, so large they bent light around them. The celestial arbiters, beings that claimed to enforce cosmic law across the universe. They accused the Varmothians of attempting to transcend their evolutionary boundaries, of reaching for powers that would upset the universal balance. Jake watched through Coranthax's memories as the arbiters passed their sentence. Not death, something worse. Temporal stasis. The entire Varmothian civilization, billions of souls, frozen in a single moment of time. Their home worlds turned to crystal, their ships locked mid-flight, their children stopped in the middle of playing games that would never finish. Only Coranthax was left awake, sealed in stone as a keeper, forced to watch and wait and remember while the rest of the galaxy forgot his people ever existed. Why me? Jake managed to whisper. His nose was bleeding, and his head felt like it might split open. Why humans? Coranthax's response came with a mixture of hope and desperation. Before the arbiters sealed them away, the Varmothian scientists had done something brilliant and crazy. They'd studied every young species in the galaxy, looking for one that might eventually be curious enough and stubborn enough to help. One that hadn't been raised under the arbiters' rules, that still remembered what it meant to break boundaries. They'd found humanity's ancestor languages, back when humans were still on Earth and hadn't even invented the wheel yet. And they'd hidden the unsealing word there, buried in the root structure of human speech itself. A word that could only be pronounced by human vocal cords, that could only be understood by minds shaped by human evolution. The Varmothians had literally bet their civilization's future on humanity's inability to leave well enough alone. The word you spoke was just the first key, Coranthax explained, his ancient voice becoming clearer in Jake's mind. It awakened me, but the full unsealing requires 7 more words spoken at 7 more shrines. And now that I'm awake, the countdown has started. My people have 8 years before the stasis becomes permanent and irreversible. Emily finally managed to pull Jake to his feet. His legs were shaking, but the overwhelming pressure in his mind was starting to stabilize. Coranthax was there now, a permanent presence in the back of his thoughts, like a roommate he'd never asked for. Jake, we need to go, his mom said urgently. Security forces were pouring into the shrine, their weapons trained on the still glowing dragon statue. Whatever you did, the Kelthians are calling it a Class A violation. They're talking about arrest, trial, imprisonment. It's worse than that, Jake said quietly. Through Coranthax's senses, he could feel something stirring in the space between dimensions. The arbiters know what happened. They felt it the moment the shrine activated. His mom's face went pale. The arbiters are real? I thought they were just mythology. So did everyone else. That's what they wanted. Jake looked at the dragon statue one last time. The golden fire in its eyes was dimmer now, but still burning. Mom, I didn't just wake up an alien. I started a war that's been on pause for 800 years. Explosions rocked the shrine as Kelthian tactical teams breached the outer chambers. Emily grabbed Jake's hand and ran, pulling him through a maintenance tunnel that the researchers used for equipment transport. Behind them, they could hear officers shouting about containment and quarantine. They emerged into the red desert night, where Captain David Ross waited beside his battered cargo ship, the Wandering Star. He was a human smuggler who'd been supplying the expedition with black market coffee and Earth foods. Doc, I don't know what you did in there, Ross said, firing up the ship's engines, but half the galaxy's military just went on high alert. We need to leave. Now. As the ship lifted off, Jake looked back at the Dragon Shrine. 6 other shrines across the galaxy were starting to glow with the same golden light. 6 more keepers waking up after centuries of darkness. And somewhere beyond normal space, the celestial arbiters were coming. The Wandering Star barely made it out of Kelthian space before the warrants went live. Captain Ross had the ship's comm system cycling through news feeds from a dozen different planets, and every single one was talking about the same thing: the human boy who'd activated forbidden xenotech and potentially started a galactic crisis. Emily sat beside Jake in the cargo hold, holding an ice pack to his forehead. The bleeding had stopped, but he still looked pale and exhausted. Coranthax's presence in his mind had settled into something manageable, like background music he couldn't turn off. The Kelthian conclave is calling for our immediate extradition, Ross called from the cockpit. They're saying we violated the Preservation Act, endangered a heritage site and committed cultural terrorism. The bounty just hit 2 million credits. What about Earth? Emily asked, her voice tight with worry. What's the human government saying? Ross went quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone was bitter. Earth's diplomatic corps just released a statement. They're calling it an unauthorized civilian action, and have officially disavowed any connection to you. They're not protecting you, document. They're throwing you to the wolves to save humanity's reputation. Jake felt his mom's hand tighten around his. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 40 years ago, making them the newest and least trusted species in the Alliance. Every human diplomat walked on eggshells, terrified of making the older species regret letting Earth join. Now Jake had done the one thing they'd been desperately trying to avoid. He'd proven that humans were dangerous wild cards who couldn't be trusted with ancient technology. There's more, Ross continued. Reports are coming in from 6 other planets. Shrines identical to the one on Kelth Prime are activating. Scientists are detecting energy signatures they've never seen before. And there's chatter about the celestial arbiters. People are scared, document really scared. Jake closed his eyes and reached out with the part of his mind that Coranthax now occupied. He could feel the other keepers awakening across the galaxy, ancient consciousnesses stretching after 8 centuries of sleep, calling out to each other like old friends. They were searching for him, the human boy who'd spoken the first word. They want me to finish it, Jake said quietly. The other keepers. They're waiting for me to speak the remaining words and complete the unsealing. Absolutely not, Emily said firmly. Jake, you're 12 years old. This isn't your responsibility. But Coranthax stirred in Jake's mind, and when the ancient keeper spoke, Emily could hear it too, a voice like grinding stone and distant thunder. The boy has already made his choice by speaking the first word. The unsealing cannot be stopped, only completed or failed. If he does not finish what he started, my people remain trapped forever, and the arbiters will punish this galaxy for the attempt. So we're damned if we do and damned if we don't? Ross shouted from the cockpit. Great plan, ancient space dragon. Jake opened his eyes. Through Coranthax's expanded senses, he could see things normal humans couldn't. Reality itself was starting to ripple, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The arbiters were moving closer to normal space, and wherever they passed, the laws of physics bent and twisted. They're not just coming for the Varmothians, Jake said, his voice distant. They're coming to judge humanity too. They want to know if we're like the Varmothians, too dangerous, too chaotic to be allowed to evolve freely. The ship lurched suddenly as proximity alarms screamed. Ross cursed and pulled them into a hard turn. Through the viewport, Jake could see 3 Kelthian patrol cruisers emerging from hyperspace, their weapons already charging. We've got company, Ross announced. Hold on to something. The wandering star might have looked like a rust bucket, but Ross had spent years modifying her for exactly this kind of situation. The ship dove toward a nearby asteroid field, weaving between rocks the size of buildings while the Kelthian cruisers fired plasma bursts that turned asteroids into clouds of molten debris. Jake felt Coranthax's attention shift to the pursuing ships. I can help, the keeper offered. I still have some of my old powers. Let me. No, Jake said out loud, surprising himself. No alien powers. No shortcuts. We handle this the human way. Ross let out a bark of laughter from the cockpit. Kid, the human way usually involves running away and hoping for the best. Which, coincidentally, is exactly what we're doing. They barely escaped, jumping to hyperspace just as the Kelthian ships were closing in. But Jake knew it was only temporary. The entire galaxy was looking for them now. The Kelthian military, human diplomats trying to salvage Earth's reputation, and who knew how many other species that wanted to either use Jake or eliminate him before he could finish the unsealing. As the ship hurtled through the swirling colors of hyperspace, Jake felt something else. A cold, vast awareness turning its attention toward him like a spotlight. The arbiters had found him. And they were not pleased. We need allies, Emily said, breaking the heavy silence. We can't run forever. Is there anyone in this galaxy who might actually help us? Coranthax's response came with a hint of dark amusement. There is one place, the Terminus sector, where the other keepers are gathering. It exists partially outside normal space. The arbiters cannot reach it easily. But getting there means crossing through territory controlled by species that would happily sell you to the highest bidder. Ross checked their fuel levels and shook his head. We've got maybe 3 more jumps before we need to refuel. And every spaceport from here to the galactic rim is going to be watching for us. Jake looked at his mom, seeing the fear and determination warring in her eyes. She'd spent her whole career studying dead civilizations. Now she was caught in the middle of one trying to come back to life. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Jake said softly. Emily pulled him close. "I know, sweetheart. But it did happen. So now we figure out what to do next. Together." It took them 11 days of jumping through backwater systems and bribing corrupt port officials to reach the terminus sector. By the time the wandering star limped into the abandoned space station where the keepers had gathered, Ross had burned through his entire life savings and called in every favor he'd earned in 20 years of smuggling. The station hung in the void like a broken wheel, half in normal space and half in something else, a dimensional pocket that made Jake's eyes water when he looked at it too long. 6 other ships were docked there, vessels from species Jake had never seen before, all carrying humans who'd somehow been drawn to this place. "There are others like me?" Jake asked as they walked through corridors that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. Caranthax's presence pulsed with satisfaction in his mind. The other shrines awakened other keepers. Each one bonded with the nearest human who had the gift, the ability to perceive the old languages. "You are not alone, Keybearer." The central chamber was massive, carved from black stone that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. 6 other kids stood there, ranging from about 10 to 17 years old. Each had the same distant look in their eyes that Jake recognized from his own reflection, the look of someone sharing their head with an ancient alien consciousness. A girl about Jake's age with dark skin and braided hair stepped forward. "I'm Nicole Grant. I was on a school trip to the museum on Vorton Station when I touched a display that wasn't supposed to be touched. Been hearing voices ever since." One by one the others introduced themselves. Tyler Brooks, a 15-year-old from a mining colony. Amy Chin, who'd been 10 years old when she'd wandered into a restricted archaeological dig. Kevin Martinez, Lisa Parker, Danny Wilson, and Beth Anderson. 7 human kids from 7 different worlds, each carrying a keeper, each holding one piece of the unsealing puzzle. They chose children on purpose, Emily realized, her voice tight with anger. The Varmothians knew kids would be curious enough to trigger the shrines, too young to understand the consequences. "We understood survival," Caranthax spoke through Jake, but his voice now echoed from all 7 children simultaneously. "We needed humans who still believed in possibilities, who had not yet learned that some doors should stay closed." The room shifted, and suddenly Jake wasn't in the station anymore. He stood in a place that existed outside normal space and time, and before him stretched the entire history of the universe like a tapestry he could reach out and touch. He saw it all through the Keeper's combined memories. The universe before the Arbiters came, wild, chaotic, beautiful. Species evolving into pure energy, traveling between dimensions as easily as humans walked between rooms. Reality itself was fluid, shaped by will and imagination. Then the Arbiters arrived from their dying universe like refugees carrying the plague. They'd watched their own cosmos tear itself apart in transcendent chaos, and they were determined not to let it happen again. So they imposed order. They created laws, physical laws, mathematical laws, that locked everything into predictable patterns. Faster-than-light travel was limited. Dimensional transcendence was forbidden. Each species was nudged into evolutionary paths that kept them safely contained. "They turned the universe into a prison," Tyler said, his voice hollow. "Everything we think is natural, the speed of light, gravity, entropy, it's all artificial. The Arbiters built a cage and convinced everyone it was protection." But Jake also saw what the Arbiters had prevented. He saw the old universe dying, consumed by species that had transcended all limits and devoured everything in their hunger for more power, more knowledge, more existence. The Arbiters hadn't been evil conquerors, they'd been traumatized survivors trying to prevent another apocalypse. "So what do we do?" Nicole asked. "The Keepers want us to speak the remaining words and free the Varmothians. Start a war that'll either liberate the universe or destroy it." Before anyone could answer, reality cracked like glass and the Arbiters manifested. They were too large to truly see, existing in too many dimensions at once. Jake's mind tried to make sense of them and failed, settling on the impression of vast geometric shapes that hurt to look at. When they spoke, their voices came from everywhere and nowhere, the sound of absolute law-given voice. "Humanity, you have awakened what was sealed. You have been judged." The 7 human children stood together, and Jake felt his mom's hand grip his shoulder. Around them the Keepers stirred, ready to defend their keybearer. The Arbiters laid out their ultimatum with the cold precision of a mathematical equation. Complete the unsealing and face the same judgment as the Varmothians, species-wide imprisonment for attempting to break cosmic law. Or speak the sealing word, lock the Varmothians away forever, and humanity would be elevated. They would become the Arbiter's new enforcers, granted technology and power beyond their wildest dreams, tasked with maintaining order across the galaxy. You offer us a choice between death and slavery, Emily said, her voice shaking but defiant. Between destroying ourselves or becoming you. We offer you survival. The Varmothians chose chaos and were removed. You may choose order and prosper. Jake felt Coranthax raging in his mind, 800 years of imprisonment and loss boiling over. The Keeper wanted to fight, to finish the unsealing regardless of the cost. The other Keepers echoed that fury through their young hosts. But Jake also saw the fear in the other kids' eyes. Tyler had a baby sister back home. Nicole's dad was sick and needed her. Amy just wanted to go back to being a normal kid. They hadn't asked for this responsibility any more than Jake had. The Arbiters gave them 3 days to decide. 3 days to choose between cages and chaos, between accepting the universe as it was or gambling everything on the possibility of freedom. As the Arbiter's presence faded, Jake looked at his mom, then at the other human children carrying the weight of civilizations in their minds. There has to be another way, he said quietly. There has to be. But in the silence that followed, nobody could think of what that way might be. The countdown had begun, and in 72 hours, 7 human children would decide the fate of the universe. The 3 days felt like 3 years. The 7 human children barely slept, gathering in the central chamber while their parents and Captain Ross tried to figure out impossible solutions. The Keepers pushed constantly for the unsealing, showing them visions of Varmothian freedom and beauty. The Arbiter's deadline hung over everything like a blade waiting to fall. On the final night, Jake sat alone on the observation deck, staring out at the strange half-space where the station existed. His mom had finally fallen asleep in one of the quarters, exhausted from arguing with Coranthax about philosophy and cosmic law. The ancient Keeper didn't understand why humans kept trying to find middle ground when the universe only offered extremes. You're thinking too hard, Nicole said, sitting down beside him. I can practically hear the gears grinding from across the station. Jake managed a weak smile. My mom always says that humans are terrible at accepting the only options they're given. We always want door number 3 even when there are only 2 doors. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Nicole said thoughtfully. Her Keeper, Talvorin, stirred in her mind. The Arbiters think in absolutes. The Keepers think in absolutes. But we're human. We're messy and complicated and we don't fit in boxes very well. Something clicked in Jake's mind. He sat up straighter, his heart racing. That's it. That's exactly it. He ran back to the central chamber, Nicole following behind. The other kids were there, Tyler, Amy, Kevin, Lisa, Danny, and Beth. They all looked exhausted, scared, and about ready to give up. I know what we have to do, Jake announced. We reject both choices. Tyler shook his head. That's not how this works, Jake. The Arbiters said. The Arbiters think like machines. They gave us 2 options because that's how they see the universe, binary either or. But they're missing what makes humans different. Jake looked at each of them. We adapt. We negotiate. We find ways to make impossible things work because we're too stubborn to accept that they can't. Through Coranthax, Jake could feel the other Keepers stirring with interest. Emily appeared in the doorway, awakened by the commotion, her eyes sharp despite her exhaustion. What are you thinking? She asked. Jake closed his eyes and reached deep into the part of his mind where Coranthax lived. He could feel the word structure of the ancient language, the way meaning flowed like water through channels carved by time. His mom had spent years studying how languages evolved, how words changed and merged and created new meanings. Mom, you always said that language is alive, right? It grows and changes? Yes, but Jake. So what if we don't speak their words? What if we speak our own? The Keepers reacted with confusion and alarm. Coranthax pushed forward in Jake's mind. The unsealing requires the 7 ancient words spoken in sequence. Changing them could destroy everything. Or it could create something new, Jake countered. You hid your words in human language because you knew we'd be different. So let us be different. Emily understood first. Her eyes went wide. You want to create a new word. A synthesis. Not just one word. 7 new words. Jake looked at the other children. We each speak a word that means something the Arbiters and Keepers never considered. Not unsealing. Not sealing. Something else entirely. Like what? Amy asked, her 10-year-old voice small but curious. Like negotiation, Jake said. Like bridge. Like conversation. Like trial. Nicole stood up, excitement breaking through her exhaustion. We turn the shrines into meeting places instead of prisons or weapons. We make the Arbiters and Varmothians actually talk to each other. Over the next hours, the 7 children worked with Emily and the Keepers, who'd gone from resistant to fascinated. They crafted 7 words that had never existed before, pulling from Varmothian structure, human linguistic patterns, and pure stubborn creativity. Words that meant judgment through understanding, and freedom with responsibility, and order that allows chaos. When the Arbiters manifested at the appointed time, their presence filled with cold expectation, Jake stepped forward with the other 6 children beside him. "We have our answer," he said. "We reject your choice. That is not permitted." "You're beings of absolute law," Emily interjected, stepping beside her son. "So here's a law you can't break. When a formal challenge is issued using proper cosmic protocols, you have to acknowledge it. The Varmothians knew your rules. They taught the Keepers. And we've used those rules to call for a trial." The Arbiter's presence fluctuated, something that might have been surprise rippling through dimensions. "Explain." The 7 children spoke their 7 words in unison, and the shrines transformed. Not into prisons. Not into weapons. Into something that had never existed before, bridges between imprisoned and imprisoner, spaces where the stasis-locked Varmothians could communicate without being fully released, where the Arbiters could be questioned without being destroyed. Jake spoke for all of them. "You judged the Varmothians 800 years ago. But you're beings of law, and law requires evidence, testimony, and the right to defense. We're calling for a retrial. The Varmothians get to present their case. Every species in the galaxy gets to witness and judge. And you have to prove your order serves everyone, not just your fear." The Arbiters could not refuse. Their own nature bound them to their own laws. A proper trial had been called using ancient protocols they themselves had established. The Varmothians, speaking through the Keepers, accepted with 8 centuries of pent-up need to finally be heard. And humanity became the mediators, the chaos species that would force both sides to justify themselves. 6 months later, Jake sat in his bedroom on Earth, finishing a history essay about the Galactic Alliance formation. The Dragon Shrine on Kelth Prime had become the first court, where Arbiters, Keepers, and representatives from 1,000 species engaged in what everyone was calling the longest conversation in cosmic history. Jake was famous now, simultaneously the most celebrated and controversial human alive. Some species called him a hero. Others called him a troublemaker who'd risked everything. Most just called him incredibly, impossibly human. His mom knocked on his door. "Dinner in 10 minutes. And you're still grounded for missing curfew last Tuesday." "Mom, I was testifying before the Intergalactic Justice Commission. And you still didn't call." "10 minutes. Don't make me tell you again." Jake grinned, feeling Coranthax's amused presence in the back of his mind. The ancient keeper had learned a lot about humanity in 6 months, including the unstoppable force that was apparent who'd made dinner. The trial would take decades, maybe centuries. It would be messy and complicated and uncertain. Some species were already arguing about universal law. Others were exploring the boundaries the Arbiters had set, testing what might be possible. But that was fine. Humanity had never been good at simple answers anyway. Jake had spoken a word that changed everything, not because he chose chaos over order or order over chaos, but because he'd refused to believe those were the only choices. He'd done something the galaxy had forgotten was possible. He'd asked, why not both? And then spent 6 months explaining to ancient cosmic powers that sometimes the best answer is the one nobody thought to offer. The Dragon Shrine was no longer silent. It had become a courthouse, a parliament, a philosophy department, and a coffee shop all rolled into one. And at its heart was a simple human truth that even beings older than stars were learning to understand. Sometimes the best way forward isn't written in ancient law or cosmic prophecy. Sometimes it's created by a 12-year-old kid who was too stubborn to accept that the universe only had 2 options. The conversation was just beginning. And for the first time in 800 years, everyone was listening.